Hey guys, tonight we drift deep into the sands of ancient Egypt, where golden sunlight creeps over tombs older than memory, and the air carries a dense perfume of oils, dust, and decay. Picture yourself wandering into a chamber lit only by flickering oil lamps, the scent of frankincense curling up your nose, masking, but never quite hiding, the sickly sweet odor of something not quite alive. In the corners, shadows stretch over linen-wrapped figures resting eternally still. You're not just here to look, you're part of the process now, an assistant to the embalmers. Lucky you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's not entirely unpleasant. Earthy, smoky, a little like a spice market that's been closed for centuries. You're standing in the embalming workshop, or wabet, the pure place. It's part medical center, part sacred site, and part horror movie set. You watch as workers methodically remove organs from a lifeless body, slipping gloved hands into the abdomen with the same precision a butcher might show a chicken. It's clinical, but reverent. One organ, however, stays put. The heart. Egyptians believed it to be the seat of the soul, the part of you that would get judged in the afterlife. The brain? Scraped out through the nose with a bronze hook. Not quite as romantic. Historians still argue whether this meant they thought the brain was useless, or whether it was just inconveniently squishy. As you lean over the embalming slab, someone hands you a small cloth soaked in natron, a naturally occurring salt. You start patting it over the cooling corpse. Every inch must be purified. This was the ritual. Cleanse, preserve, wrap, and repeat. Mummification wasn't just a burial, it was a passport to eternity. And that passport? Expensive. Only the elite could afford the full deluxe package. For the poor, a little salt, a quick burial, maybe a few whispered prayers. But for those who mattered, pharaohs, priests, rich merchants, preservation meant status. Think of it as an ancient Egyptian version of luxury skincare, just with a bit more visceration. You glance at the tools beside you. Obsidian blades, reed pens, small flint knives. Each one cleansed before use, each action accompanied by a chant. One priest mutters a spell as he places the lungs into a canopic jar. It's topped with the head of Hapi, the baboon-faced son of Horus. You raise your eyebrows. Sure, monkeys guarding your organs might sound cute, until you remember they're watching over your insides for all eternity. No pressure. Fringe theories whisper that some embalmers took liberties with their clients, swapping jewels, skimming gold leaf, even selling off high-quality linen to the highest bidder. A few unfortunate mummies have been found wrapped in old rags and even discarded receipts. Turns out even in death, capitalism finds a way. Still, the process remains chillingly meticulous. The body is stuffed with resin-soaked cloth to maintain shape. The skin is oiled to shine. The nose is sometimes packed to give it that nice, not collapsed look. All to make the dead look peacefully alive. It's not a contradiction. It's a statement of belief. Death wasn't the end. It was a beginning. And like any good beginning, it deserved good lighting, good clothes, and a whole lot of planning. You pause to rest your arms, sweat beads along your forehead. It's hot, stuffy, and the air never quite clears. One of the embalmers pulls aside a curtain to reveal another body, already wrapped. The linen is layered in a precise diamond pattern, adorned with amulets tucked into the folds, tiny scarabs, eyes of Horus, and even little golden tongues for the soul to speak in the afterlife. You wonder if the amulet placement is symbolic or just superstition. Scholars still debate that too. Some say it was deeply ritualistic. Others think it was more like packing a suitcase with souvenirs. Another assistant scurries by, carrying a bowl filled with resin, a sticky, aromatic substance boiled until it thickens into a glue. This will seal the wrappings. You catch a whiff and nearly gag. Apparently, eternal life comes with eternal nausea. As the ceremony winds down, the body is readied for transport. The coffin is no plain box. It's a work of art. Hieroglyphs cover every inch, telling the story of the deceased's life, prayers for protection, and maybe a few embellishments. Owner of 200 cattle? More like 2 goats and a temper. But history is written by the living, or in this case, the ones still doing the wrapping. You follow the procession as they carry the body out, feet first, to confuse evil spirits. The streets fall quiet as the mourners pass. People bow, touch the ground, murmur blessings. Even in a city teeming with life, the dead command respect. And as the procession disappears into the distance, a question lingers. Was all this ritual for the soul of the departed, or for the comfort of the living left behind? Maybe both, maybe neither. Historians still argue that too, but for now, you're left standing in the silence of the embalming room, the last scent of frankincense curling into the dusk. You survived your first day on the job, mostly intact. Well done. You linger just a little longer in the embalming chamber before someone beckons you through a narrow corridor, lit by flickering torchlight. The heat is thicker now, heavier, like you've walked into someone's oven and decided to stay for dinner, which is exactly what's happening, except the guests of honor are several days dead. Tonight, you're attending a tomb feast, and you're oddly underdressed. You shuffle into a low courtyard surrounded by sandstone walls carved with scenes of agriculture and gods, handing ankhs to grinning nobles. In the center sits a stone offering table already piled with figs, lentils, beer jugs, and what looks suspiciously like a dried-up roast goose. Around it, families lounge on mats, men in sheer linen kilts, women with braided wigs and coal-lined eyes. Children dart between adults, snatching grapes and ducking under arms. You step over a sprawled-out uncle who's already asleep, or possibly drunk, and take a seat beside a woman balancing a pomegranate and a toddler on the same hip. This isn't a solemn affair. It's part picnic, part funeral, part reunion with Grandma's ghost. These feasts happen during key festivals like the beautiful Festival of the Valley, when families would visit their ancestors' tombs, bring food, and share stories. Offerings were laid out for the spirits, but don't worry. Humans did most of the eating. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of Sunday dinner. just with more incense and fewer functioning digestive systems. As you bite into a surprisingly chewy date, a priest approaches the offering table and begins chanting. You watch as he sprinkles beer over the stone surface and burns a pinch of myrrh. His voice is low and rhythmic, blending with the rustling of linen and the occasional snore. The idea is to invite the Ka, the soul essence of the dead, to come enjoy the feast. Not physically, of course. You won't see Grandma hovering above the hummus, but through the scent, the memory, the ritual of sharing. Some families go the extra mile. Behind you, one woman sings a song in a dialect you can't quite catch, and another smears a dab of cake onto a clay statue of her late husband. Fringe theories suggest that during certain rites, a few zealous worshippers may have believed the statues could move or even eat when imbued with the proper spells. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or taken a bit too literally by overly enthusiastic mourners. As the sun sets, torches are replaced with oil lamps, and the air takes on a smoky sweetness. You notice that the tomb itself, its entrance right behind the table, is not closed. In fact, some guests drift inside casually, almost as if checking on a guest bedroom. You follow them down a short ramp, your feet slipping slightly on the sand-worn steps, and find yourself face to face with a painted sarcophagus. Here lies the host of the evening, a former scribe named Mena, who, based on the inscriptions, was either beloved of Thoth or chronically full of himself. It's hard to tell sometimes with ancient titles. You run your fingers along the hieroglyphs carved into the wall beside his resting place. There's Mena, fishing in the Nile, chatting with Osiris, and, oddly, shown making bread with what looks like a tiny cat perched on his head. Artistic liberties? Possibly. Religious symbolism? Probably. Someone having fun with a chisel? Definitely. Back outside, a group begins to clap in time to a drum beat, and a few dancers, young girls with anklets and wide eyes, start to twirl among the guests. This isn't performance art. It's entertainment for both the living and the dead. You're beginning to realize that ancient Egyptians didn't just mourn the dead. They hosted them, honored them, laughed with them. The feast takes on an almost surreal energy as the boundary between this world and the next blurs slightly. One older man even swears he saw his grandfather wink from a wall painting. You nod politely. Another joke? Or maybe not. Historians still argue whether the ancients truly believed the dead could make contact during these feasts, or if it was just comforting folklore, like your grandma's ghost hovering until everyone's had dessert. A boy offers you a small loaf of bread and you take it, hard, slightly sour, and more stone than sponge cake. Still, the gesture counts, and it's probably safer than the fermented fish pudding another family's passing around. Suddenly, a shout goes up near the back of the courtyard. A monkey, no joke, has stolen someone's beer jug and is now scrambling up a tree triumphantly, sloshing the contents on the crowd. Laughter erupts. You duck as a splash lands near your foot. "He's sacred," someone calls out, or at least very drunk. Turns out, monkeys were sometimes associated with Thoth, and even depicted playing musical instruments in tomb art. Whether this one is divine or just opportunistic, you'll never know. But you make a mental note to keep your snacks close. As the night deepens, people begin to drift home. carrying leftover bread and half-empty jars. A few linger to say final prayers. You remain seated a while longer, watching the last embers of the offering fire fade into the stars. It's strange. You think how something so intimate could feel so eternal. In our world, we avoid death, bury it, sanitize it. But here, you embrace it, eat beside it, sing to it. And as you rise and walk quietly away from the tomb, full of flat beer and too much symbolism, you realize you've just dined with ghosts and found them surprisingly good company. You're not quite sure what time it is now, if time even exists the same way in this dreamlike desert. The stars have shifted, and the moon sits heavy in the sky, casting silver shadows that cling to stone, columns and obelisks. You follow a procession of priests moving silently toward a tomb entrance, each carrying something. A feather, a knife, a small wooden figurine. One holds what looks like a tiny sculptor's chisel. This, you learn, is the ritual of the opening, of the mouth. And no, it's not dental work. You edge closer, the sand crunching softly beneath your feet. Before you stands the mummy of a nobleman propped upright like a very patient guest at his own going-away party. He's wrapped tight, painted with gold leaf across the face, and surrounded by jars, charms, and two particularly stylish sandals. Never underestimate the importance of footwear in the afterlife. This ritual is said to awaken the senses of the deceased, to give them breath, speech, hearing, and sight again, so they can function in the next world. A priest, dressed as Anubis with a sleek jackal mask, steps forward, holding what's known as a pesesh kef. It looks a bit like a bronze tuning fork got into a fight with a butter knife. He touches it to the lips of the mummy and begins to chant. The ceremony unfolds slowly. The priest moves methodically, lips, ears, eyes, nostrils, repeating invocations that would have sounded just as eerie 3,000 years ago. Each gesture is loaded with meaning. You can almost feel the layers of belief, the certainty that the dead need these senses, that this is not just for show. Now here's the twist. Some scholars believe the ritual was once performed on statues, before being adapted to actual mummies. Others argue it was symbolic the whole time, a theatrical gesture rather than a spiritual key. And yes, historians still argue about whether the ritual actually restored something, or if it was just high-concept mortuary performance art. Suddenly, a priest beside you leans in and whispers that in rare cases, the ritual was reenacted. On the dying, not the dead. Wait, what? Fringe tales describe nobles requesting the ceremony in their final hours, to ensure a smooth spiritual transition. Whether that's myth, mistranslation, or just some very extra last rites is unclear. But you'd probably pass on that package deal. Back in the tomb, the ceremony continues. Incense burns. Spells swirl through the air. An offering of beer and bread is placed at the mummy's feet, because no one wants to awaken hungry in the afterlife. You make a mental note. If you ever come back as a spirit, request something fancier. Maybe a cinnamon roll. There's a moment, just a flicker, when the light shifts and the gold-painted lips seem to smile. Your breath catches. You blink. Was it shadow? The play of torchlight? A hiccup in your sleepy brain? You're not sure, but no one else reacts. The priest steps back, satisfied. He declares the ritual complete. The dead can now speak, Maybe not here, maybe not tonight, but in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, the nobleman now has a voice. You follow the group as they exit the tomb and step back into the night. One priest remains behind, brushing a charm across the doorway, sealing the space with one last, whispered phrase. You want to ask what it meant, but his eyes are distant, like he's already halfway to the next world himself. Outside, a breeze picks up. It smells faintly of lotus and copper. You exhale, slow and steady, as if you've been holding your breath for centuries. Something about that ceremony shook you. Not out of fear, exactly, but awe. The dedication, the belief, the idea that death isn't a full stop but an ellipsis, a ... leading into some mysterious sequel, and then it hits you. This wasn't just a rite for the dead. It was for the living, too. To help them believe. To comfort. To anchor their grief with rituals that made the unknowable seem less manageable. You remember the opening lines of the ceremony. I have come that I may open your mouth. Oddly tender, almost poetic, and kind of terrifying if you're the one lying there wrapped up like a taco platter. You walk in silence for a while, the sand cool beneath your sandals, and your mind spinning gently like a jar lid slowly loosening. The night feels different now. Deeper. You don't know if it's the incense, the chants, or just your imagination. But it's like the air itself is humming with old words, ancient breath, the remnants of voices long faded into the wind. And still you walk. You pass a statue of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, his long beak silhouetted against the stars. In his hand, he holds a writing palette. You wonder if he's been taking notes this whole time. If someone's out there grading all these rituals like cosmic Yelp reviews, a whisper behind you. The breeze again? Or maybe that nobleman, newly awakened, testing out his resurrected voice. You don't look back. You've had your fill of ancient monologues for one evening. But you do smile. Because somewhere in that tomb, a once silent mummy now has words. Even if you're not sure what he'll say, or who he'll say it to. You thought things couldn't get weirder after watching someone poke a mummy in the lips with a ceremonial butter knife. But here we are, being ushered toward a chamber filled with dolls. Not the cuddly kind. These are ushabtis. Little figurines made of faience, wood, or even stone, lined up in eerie, orderly rows like an army of silent interns. Some have serene faces, others look like they were carved in a hurry by someone who didn't quite pass art class. But they all serve the same purpose, working for the dead. Yes, you've arrived at the ancient Egyptian concept of the afterlife workforce. You step inside a room where shelves of these figures stretch into the shadows. A candle flickers as you pass a particularly stern-looking one holding what appears to be a tiny hoe. You lean in and whisper, "Sounds like my first job," and imagine your modern resume on a clay tablet. Proficiency in Excel and grain threshing. The idea behind ushabtis, sometimes spelled shabtis or shawabtis, because ancient languages apparently enjoyed chaos, was simple. In the afterlife, you didn't want to do your own chores, so you packed your tomb with these helpful little proxies. When Osiris, lord of the underworld, called on you to work, the ushabtis would spring to life and go instead. Some tombs had a dozen. Others, over 400. Pharaohs were particularly fond of building entire doll armies. Ramesses II had so many, they could have filled a decent-sized office building. Historians still argue whether these figures were truly believed to animate or were more symbolic, like leaving your laundry to your roommate and hoping they'll get the hint. Here comes the quirky bit. Some of the richer nobles included. Supervisor Ushabtis. Yep. Middle management in the afterlife. These were usually slightly larger, with little whips or scrolls, presumably there to keep the regular Ushabtis from slacking off. Even in eternity, someone had to send passive-aggressive memos. You run your fingers along the smooth glaze of a blue faience figure. It's cold, almost wet to the touch, though the room is dry. A trick of your tired brain? Maybe. Or maybe it really is waiting. The spell inscribed on it, Chapter 6 of the Book of the Dead, asks the figure to respond on behalf of the deceased whenever duty calls. No weekends off. No PTO. Welcome to ghost gig work. The air grows still. The candles barely flicker. You start to imagine what it would feel like if one moved. Just a twitch. Just a turn of the head. You blink. Nothing happens. Still, your brain insists. That one's watching you. To distract yourself, you focus on something else. Namely, the craftsmanship. Some Ushabtis are stunningly detailed, with tiny hands holding tiny tools. Others? Well, let's just say the sculptor may have been paid in leftover lentils. One is so lumpy it looks like a toad wrapped in gauze. And yet, even these humble figures held spiritual weight. For the lower classes who couldn't afford elaborate mummification or golden tombs, a single Ushabti might be their one shot at help in the next life. A little blue insurance policy made of clay. You think about your own life. About all the times you've wished someone else could just do it for you. Grocery shopping, taxes, emotional labor. And now here you are, staring at ancient evidence that humans have always wanted a way to delegate the hard stuff. There's one figure tucked into a corner shelf that catches your eye. It's different, taller, carved from wood, with actual linen wrapped around its waist like a tiny skirt. Instead of a hoe, it holds a scroll. A scribe's Ushabti. Someone thought this figure would write letters, record harvests, maybe keep ledgers in the land of the dead. A ghost accountant. Fringe interpretations suggest that in some temples, elite Ushabtis were even activated with miniature rituals, anointing, chanting, placing them beside offering tables. Whether or not they believed the dolls truly awoke, the intent was clear. This wasn't just prep work. It was a form of hope, control, assurance that things wouldn't be as chaotic on the other side as they were here. Historians debate the sincerity behind it. Was it all ceremony, a cultural placebo, or did they genuinely expect little figurines to hoe phantom fields? You pause by the exit of the room, glancing one last time at the rows of figurines lined up like spectral co-workers in matching uniforms. One near the end seems to smile. You decide not to look twice. If it's haunted, it can stay haunted. Outside, the air feels fresher, though you swear a faint whisper trails behind you. Something like a yawn. Maybe a stretch. The sound of 400 afterlife interns waking up from a very long nap. You think of the modern world again, of how we automate everything, build AI, outsourced tasks to people we'll never meet. Maybe the ancient Egyptians weren't so different. Maybe the Ushabti was their version of delegation. Small bodies, big dreams, eternally on call. You glance at your own hands and wonder what your Ushabti would carry. A phone? A laptop? A to-do list scribbled on the back of an old receipt? The thought makes you laugh softly as you walk onward, deeper into the desert, the stars now brighter above your head. Somewhere, behind stone and silence, your little helpers wait. And honestly, you're starting to wish they were real. The sky overhead is beginning to bleed a soft violet hue, though it might just be your eyelids growing heavy. You follow the slope of the desert as it dips into a quieter valley, where the wind seems to hush itself into reverence. Before you lies a structure partially sunk into sand, a sacred birth house, or mamisi. But you're not here for divine births tonight. You're here for crocodiles. You heard that right. Actual crocodiles. Swaddled, mummified, worshipped. You approach cautiously, half expecting one to leap out. But these crocs are long gone, preserved, bundled in linen, and stacked like scaly sarcophagi in a low clay-walled chamber. They're elongated, shapes lie side by side, painted, adorned, and in some cases, wearing jewelry. Because why wouldn't a sacred reptile need a necklace? Welcome to the crocodile cults of ancient Egypt, where Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of fertility, power, and Nile waters, was worshipped with what can only be described as alarming enthusiasm. Sobek was no minor figure. He ruled the riverbanks, symbolized both creative power and terrifying destruction, and, according to one myth, created the Nile from his sweat. Bit gross, still impressive. As you wander through the chamber, your foot nudges something, a low pedestal with tiny crocodile figurines arrayed like trophies. Some are just a few inches long, made from bronze or fired clay. Others, full-scale mummies. Entire temples were dedicated to them, especially in places like Kom-Ombo and Crocodilopolis. Yes, that was the actual name of a city. And no, it doesn't sound any less ridiculous even when whispered under torchlight. You glance at one croc lying peacefully under thick, sun-faded linen. It's decorated with sacred symbols and a faint dusting of gold. It looks strangely regal, like a snoozing pharaoh with too many teeth. According to records, priests raised these crocodiles in temple pools, fed them lavish diets, and when they died, embalmed them with the same care as humans. Oils, resin, linen, spells. You start to wonder, were there little crocodile coffins too? Turns out, yes. In some cases, the crocs were buried in stone sarcophagi with inscriptions, amulets, even tiny offerings. One was found with its mouth stuffed full of grain and flowers, which feels a bit like someone couldn't decide whether to mummify it or turn it into potpourri. Here's the kicker. Historians still argue whether these mummified crocs were pets, symbols, offerings, or literal representations of the god Sobek himself. Some think the crocs were treated as divine avatars, living embodiments of Sobek, pampered and revered like celebrities. Others suggest they were spiritual messengers, meant to carry prayers to the gods. And a few fringe theories. They propose that priests used trained crocs to stage miraculous divine signs during festivals. Imagine that. A crocodile waddling out on cue while everyone cheers and throws lotus petals. You sit quietly beside one particularly large croc mummy, its mouth slightly ajar, as if caught mid-smile or mid-snore. It's almost endearing, if you ignore the 100 teeth. You find yourself wondering about the priest whose job it was to wrap that mouth. Did he hesitate? Did he have to draw straws? There are even stranger stories. In some crocodile burials, CT scans revealed there was no croc inside at all, just bundles of sticks, stones, or linen shaped like crocodiles. Either the real croc was too sacred to disturb, or, more likely, the priests ran out of crocs and didn't want to disappoint the pilgrims. Ancient merchandising, you think? Croc lore, with none of the bite. Your gaze drifts to a wall painting. Sobek, with his gleaming green skin and crocodile snout, striding alongside Horus like they're on an ancient buddy cop show. He carries an ankh, a symbol of life, and a staff, because even crocodile gods need to accessorize. Sobek was also believed to protect people from the dangers of the Nile. And considering that includes actual crocodiles, the logic feels pretty solid. Worship the croc god, and maybe his toothy cousins will leave you alone. You move to a back corner, where a low platform holds a rare sight: baby crocodile mummies. Yep, tiny, carefully bound bundles, no longer than your forearm. Some were stacked on top of adult croc mummies like sacred family portraits. Others were buried solo, each one a miniature vessel of devotion. It's around here that things blur a bit. You're not sure if you've been staring too long or if the soft torchlight is playing tricks, but you could swear the linen on one croc shifts slightly. Not a lot. Just a wrinkle smoothing itself out. You blink. It's still. Probably just the heat. Or your brain trying to keep you awake with micro jump scares. You lean against the wall and take a breath. The place doesn't smell as bad as you expected. Mostly dust, faint resin, and something sweet like lotus. You imagine the priests bustling around centuries ago, preparing these crocs with careful hands, whispering prayers over each one. Their faces calm, reverent, or maybe a little nervous. Because how do you honor a creature that could just as easily eat you as bless you? Maybe that's the whole point. Sobek represented power and danger wrapped in divinity. To worship him meant respecting both chaos and control. Life. You give one last glance at the rows of mummified crocs and chuckle softly. You've seen human mummies, ghost labor forces, ritual mouth opening, and now a sarcophagus full of sacred reptiles. If there's a punchline to this surreal parade of ancient rituals, it's probably somewhere in here. Maybe the ancient Egyptians were just incredibly ahead of the curve on weird. Or maybe they knew something we've forgotten. How to wrap fear in reverence, danger in gold, and the most frightening things in linen. Your sandals crunch gently over ancient stone as you leave the crocodiles behind. The stars overhead spin slowly in silence, and the cool night air tugs at your sleeves like a whisper. Don't sleep just yet. There's something else to see. You enter a narrow corridor that slopes downward, its walls etched with faded figures. Bearded gods, floating ankhs, and those ever-watchful eyes of Horus. But this time, the atmosphere feels different, thicker, as if even the air knows you're heading somewhere forbidden. At the end of the corridor lies a chamber rarely spoken of in the travel guides, the ritual of the slaying of Osiris. Yes, you're about to witness the myth come to life. Not the sanitized classroom version, but the old, raw, whispered one, repeated in secret midnight ceremonies in temples too sacred for sunlight. So here's the setup. Osiris, god of the afterlife and all things green and regenerative, is murdered by his jealous brother Set. Not just murdered, mind you, dismembered, scattered across Egypt like macabre confetti. Isis, his devoted wife and magician extraordinaire, retrieves the pieces, reassembles him, minus one missing bit, which is a story for a different rating, and through divine love or sheer determination, resurrects him long enough to conceive their son, Horus. You pause in the chamber, taking in the symbols carved deep into the stone. A table in the center is blackened by age and soot. This is where it happened. The symbolic slaying of Osiris. Not once, but every year, as part of the grand Osirian mysteries. The ritual was part performance, part magic, and part therapy. For the land, for the people, for death itself. Every detail was a reenactment, carried out with stunning seriousness. Clay effigies of Osiris were made, often filled with sacred grain like wheat or barley. These corn mummies were buried and watered, symbolizing death and rebirth. It was like composting, but religious, and infinitely more dramatic. You glance at a surviving effigy behind a cracked pane of glass. Its body is barely visible. Beneath sprouted green shoots. Life from death. Hope from decay. Also, slightly moldy. But the Osirian ritual didn't stop at plant-based symbolism. In some ceremonies, a priest would take on the role of Set and kill another priest portraying Osiris. No actual death, just intense choreography, ritual chants, and what was probably the most metal theater production of its time. Fringe. Theories? Oh, they love this part. Some believe that in earlier, darker periods, the role of Osiris might not have been symbolic at all. That an actual person, likely a prisoner or a temple slave, was chosen to become Osiris and then sacrificed. There's no hard proof, of course, just a few disturbing murals and one very ambiguous papyrus fragment. Historians still argue whether the Osirian drama ever crossed into literal bloodshed, or whether it remained symbolic from the start. You sit near the chamber wall, the cold stone pressing into your back. A faint breeze moves through the space, carrying the scent of crushed herbs, the kind they might have used during the rituals: frankincense, myrrh, maybe cinnamon. You close your eyes and imagine the temple alive, priests in linen robes chanting by torchlight, dancers moving like reeds in a current, a clay figure lowered into a grave of moist soil. It's not horror they're enacting, it's hope. The death of Osiris meant the promise of return. His seasonal resurrection mirrored the flooding of the Nile, the rebirth of crops, the cycle of life. One must die for the world to grow again. But still, there's something unsettling about acting it out year after year, watching a god be torn apart, again and again, and never once forgetting the pain. You walk around the ritual table, trailing, your fingers along its edge. It's cracked, scorched, pitted with time. You wonder how many priests stood here before you, chanting words in a language that no longer exists on anyone's tongue. How many grains they pressed into Osiris effigies. How many times they buried and wept and hoped for spring. A small stone basin sits nearby. Inside it, faint remnants of green. You squint. It's sprouted barley. Someone's still been performing the rites even now. A modern offering? A quiet homage? You don't know. And honestly, you don't need to. Sometimes, rituals are their own answers. As you prepare to leave the chamber, you spot a curious carving just above the lintel. Isis kneeling, arms outstretched, hovering over a prone Osiris, her wings spread wide, protectively, like a sheltering storm. Some versions of the myth say she turned into a bird to breathe life back into him. Others say her magic was stronger than death itself. You smile, because no matter the version, the message is clear. Rebirth is real. Not easy, not painless, but possible. You step out of the chamber, the night now deeper, stars flickering like dust scattered by gods. Somewhere behind you, barley continues to sprout from a clay corpse. And as strange as it sounds, you find that oddly comforting, because if Osiris can return from being chopped into 13 pieces and scattered across a desert, then maybe, just maybe, you can survive that email inbox tomorrow. You're not quite sure how far you've wandered now. The desert feels quieter, the stars somehow sharper, like they're leaning in to listen. You brush past a curtain of wind-blown sand and find yourself at the edge of another ruin. This one feels older, stranger. Its doorway is shaped like a gaping mouth, its teeth carved stone. An invitation? A warning? Either way, you step through. The room inside is thick with the scent of oil and beeswax. Low niches in the walls glow faintly, just enough to see what's ahead. Masks. Dozens of them. Golden, painted, obsidian-eyed. And in the center, a tall throne surrounded by jars, brushes, and makeup palettes. You've just stumbled into the preparation chamber for the most sacred, and surprisingly glam, ritual in ancient Egypt, the ceremony of the opening of the mouth. Sounds dramatic, right? That's because it was. Here's the core idea. Egyptians believed that after death, your spirit, your ka, needed to eat, drink, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. And none of that would happen unless your body, or its statue, was magically awakened. Enter the opening of the mouth, a spellbinding ritual performed on mummies to reanimate their senses. Not for zombie shenanigans. This was about divine communication, not walking dead. You settle onto a low stone bench as if waiting for the show to start. And oh, what a show it must have been. A priest dressed as Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, would step forward with a long, curved tool, often shaped like a fish spine or an adze. With solemn movements, he would touch the mummy's mouth, eyes, and ears, each gesture accompanied by sacred chants. The adze, by the way, wasn't just for drama. It was symbolic of agricultural tools, things that opened the land to allow new life. So in this case, it was opening the soul's doorway. Not just anyone could perform this rite. High priests, temple officials, and embalmers all had their roles. Some would sprinkle incense, Others would recite from the Book of the Dead. There might even be dancing. If this sounds like a multi-part theater production with optional fire effects, you're getting the picture. Quirky detail for your dreams tonight. Some opening. You walk past a display of ceremonial items. Incense burners shaped like cobras, flint knives with handles carved like lotus flowers, and a small box labeled in cracked hieroglyphs. Inside are amulets meant to be inserted into the mummy's mouth. After the ritual, one looks like a tiny tongue made of gold foil. Suddenly your own tongue feels a little dry. Historians still argue whether the ritual was purely symbolic, or if they believed it actually brought the dead to a kind of second life. Some tomb scenes show the deceased sitting upright, arms outstretched, eyes open. Others show the ritual being performed on statues, hinting that it wasn't the physical corpse that mattered, but the spirit's vessel, whichever form it took. 1. Fringe theory suggests that the act wasn't just about awakening the dead, but communicating with them, like flipping on a divine phone line. You imagine a solemn priest tapping the mouth of a golden sarcophagus and whispering, "Can you hear me now?" You stop in front of a statue, a limestone effigy of a noblewoman. Her eyes are inlaid with obsidian and quartz. Her lips are slightly parted. You can almost hear the whisper of a first breath. She's been silent for thousands of years, and yet part of her seems awake. Some versions of the ritual went even further. They involved mock battles, slaughtered cattle, and the symbolic feeding of the mummy afterward, offering real bread, beer, and roast goose to the spirit. A ritual feast. After all, no one wants to enter eternity on an empty stomach. You trace your fingers along a chant inscribed on the wall. O Osiris, open your mouth to speak, your eyes to see, your ears to hear, your legs to walk. Simple, poetic, terrifying. You wonder, did it work? Did they feel the presence of the dead afterward? Was the ritual comforting or eerie? Did a cold breeze rustle their robes when the spirit stirred? One thing's certain, they believed. Deeply, faithfully, and with flair. You imagine being a guest at one of these ceremonies, watching from the shadows as the priest steps forward with his cosmic fish spine tool, his voice rising in time with the flickering of oil lamps. The mummy lies still, silent, waiting. And then, with a final touch, its mouth opens. Not literally, of course, hopefully, but symbolically, something stirs. The veil thins, and suddenly, the afterlife feels one step closer. The air in the chamber is cooler now. You wrap your arms around yourself and sit quietly as the light flickers over the statues and masks. You realize something strange. All of this, the incense, the chanting, the celestial tools, isn't about clinging to life. It's about release, a gentle nudging into the next world. A way to say, you are ready now. Go on. You lean back against the wall, your breathing slow, steady. Somewhere in the dark, the statue of the noblewoman seems to exhale, and you, watching it all, feel a little less afraid of silence. By now, the desert air has cooled enough to bite. You tug your sleeves tighter as you climb the worn stairs out of the ceremonial chamber. blinking at the wide sky. The stars above Egypt don't just twinkle, they blaze, like they know they're being watched. You shuffle forward, away from the mask-lined walls and the cold breath of ancient rites. You're not done yet. Tonight, you wander toward one of the strangest rituals of all. And yes, that's saying something after golden tongue amulets and crocodile dung. This one, it's about letters. Love letters, actually. Except instead of mailing them, you buried them next to a corpse. Yes, you're heading toward a ritual called Letters to the Dead. You follow a path flanked by crumbling mud brick walls. No grand pillars here. This is no temple or tomb fit for a pharaoh. These are the smaller graves, the ones tucked away at the edges of necropolises, the ones where grief felt more personal. In ancient Egypt, when your loved one died, you didn't just leave flowers, you wrote them a note. And then you buried it with them, slipped it between their linens, or placed it in a pot beside their grave. The idea was simple, haunting, and strangely beautiful. The dead could still help you, if they wanted to. You pause beside a grave marker, barely a foot high, no hieroglyphs. Just a chipped ceramic bowl beside it, half buried in sand. In one excavation, archaeologists found just such a bowl, and inside it, a folded bit of linen, ink smudged with a desperate message. "I've been wronged," it began, "and I know you see what they've done." Imagine writing to your grandmother, after she's gone, asking her to haunt your ex. That's the vibe. These letters range from tender to terrifying. One fragment pleads, "Speak to the gods for me." Another snarls, "Let them suffer until they give me what is mine." Egyptians believed the dead could act as mediators, advocates, even enforcers, and sometimes petty revenge artists. Some people included bribes, small offerings, perfumes, favorite foods to sweeten the afterlife deal. Because, let's be honest, if you're going to ask Grandpa to rise from his peaceful slumber and help you with a land dispute, you'd better show up with a snack. The wind picks up as you pass a low stone platform where someone has carefully arranged jars and pebbles. Maybe they're modern offerings. Maybe the desert's just messing with you. But the feeling here is different. Quiet, but charged. Like something's listening. You sit, legs crossed, and think about those letters. What would you write? Who would you write to? And more importantly, what would you dare to ask? Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly believed to summon action from the dead, or if they were more like spiritual therapy, a way to process grief and frustration. Some letters are heartbreakingly mundane. Complaints about stolen goods, debt, mistreatment. Others dip into the mystical, curses, dreams, prayers for fertility. A fringe theory even suggests these letters were sometimes answered, not with ink and paper, of course, but through dreams, sudden changes of fortune, or eerie signs. Picture this. You write to your sister's spirit asking her to curse your rude neighbor, and 2 days later, the neighbor's goats mysteriously vanish. Coincidence? Maybe. But in ancient Egypt, that counted as divine justice served. You walk further, the sand crunching like sugar under your shoes. In a small alcove, half sheltered by rock, you find something unexpected. A replica letter. part of an exhibit left for curious night wanderers like yourself. The note reads, "Mother, I miss you. The harvest is late. I offered bread and beer. Please help the rains come. No anger, just longing. And maybe, somewhere beyond, a mother who listens." The Egyptians didn't separate the living and the dead the way we do. Death wasn't a full stop. It was more like a change of address. You could still visit, still chat, still ask for help with annoying relatives and irrigation. And if you're wondering whether this was widespread or just fringe behavior, know this. Letters to the dead have been found all over Egypt, tucked into tombs carved into stele, even scratched onto the backs of old pottery shards, which, let's be honest, is the ancient version of texting your ghost grandma on a broken iPhone. You turn back toward the main path, the wind brushing over your shoulders like an old friend. You can't shake the feeling that you're being followed, not in a scary way, but in the way you feel when someone's watching over you. You glance back once, and though the graves are still, you can almost hear the rustle of papyrus. Somewhere, a question has been asked. Somewhere, a reply might be coming. You pull your collar tight and walk on, more thoughtful than before. Not every ritual needed torches and gold. Sometimes all it took was ink, memory, and the quiet hope that love doesn't stop when breath does. The sand shifts behind you as you leave the letters behind, and in the silence, you could almost believe someone just read one. You rub your eyes and stretch your legs, trying to shake off the gentle fuzz of drowsiness creeping in. But sleep will have to wait, because ahead lies a structure like none you've seen tonight. It's low and wide, built partly into the earth, with slanted stone walls streaked by the wind. You duck through a narrow doorway and feel warmth wash over you. Not welcome to the House of Life. No, not a spa. Although honestly the vibe is kind of spa adjacent. But this place wasn't meant for pampering. It was for preserving. This was where scribes worked, where sacred texts were copied, and more curiously, where spells were brewed. You step lightly across the chamber. Along the far wall, shelves hold rows of small ceramic jars labeled in hieratic script. Others are filled with crushed plants, powdered minerals, bits of resin, and oddly shaped stones. This was Egypt's version of a lab meets library meets apothecary. And what they created here was no joke. These people brewed protective incantations, healing spells, and yes, curses. And it was all incredibly organized. You half expect to see a clipboard somewhere. Now, you might wonder, did Egyptians really believe magic was real? The answer is yes, deeply, passionately, but not magic like pulling rabbits from hats, more like activating the divine coding beneath reality. Magic, called Heka, was part of daily life, and the House of Life was the central command for keeping it running. Some of these rituals were genuinely wholesome. Spells to protect children, invocations to soothe the sick, charms to ensure safe childbirth. Others, less cuddly. You pass a scroll that includes a spell to bind the limbs of your enemy with invisible cords. A few feet away, another suggests whispering curses into a clay figurine's ear, then baking it in fire. Basically ancient voodoo with extra paperwork. There's a fringe theory that some spells required blood. Not human, don't worry, but possibly that of a specific bird or animal sacred to a certain god. Some practitioners may have even performed the rituals under specific moon phases, or with particular sense burning. Magic, after all, had rules. Lots of them. Kind of like tax law, but with better robes. A basin sits in the center of the chamber, its rim etched with looping text. You lean over and catch a whiff of something herbal and sharp. Maybe myrrh? Or 1,000-year-old soup gone slightly sentient. This is where ritual purification happened before spell work. Think magical hand-washing, but with cosmic implications. Historians still argue whether the spells were considered metaphorical psychology tricks, or if the practitioners genuinely expected physical results. One side points to the complexity of the rites, the other to the staggering bureaucracy involved. Spells had to be copied exactly. Tiny errors could misfire the spell, or worse, backfire. You can practically hear the ancient scribe muttering, "Oops, I accidentally cursed myself again." You pause at a small nook lined with wax tablets, each containing what look like trial versions of incantations. Practice spells, apprentice work. Someone here once learned how to call on the protection of Thoth, or neutralize nightmares with a series of rhythmic phrases. One board even has what might be an early version of a lullaby spell. So yes, bedtime magic was a thing. You smile at the thought. Imagine being rocked to sleep by a hymn whispered by a young apprentice who just mastered the difference between a healing glyph and one that accidentally summons frogs. The House of Life was also a training ground. Students learned to read, write, and memorize thousands of words, an ancient Hogwarts if you squint hard enough. But instead of wands, they used reed pens. Instead of flying brooms, they, well, mostly just got yelled at by older scribes. Progress. You pick up a fragment of an old scroll and read part of a spell aloud under your breath. The air stirs slightly. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe you've just become an accidental initiate. Don't worry, side effects are usually mild. Just avoid mirrors for a few days. There's something cozy about this space, despite the serious content. It's easy to picture the soft scrape of pen on papyrus, the murmured repetitions of ritual lines, the way smoke curled from censers in slow spirals toward the ceiling. You feel like you're not just watching history. You're sitting in it, breathing it, almost contributing to it. And though no fire crackles in the basin now, and no spells echo through the halls, the quiet is full of intention, of effort. These rituals weren't just superstition. They were precision, compassion, and the very human desire to control what cannot be seen. One last scroll catches your attention. It's partially unrolled, revealing a spell to protect the dreamer from harm during sleep. How appropriate. It reads, "Let no shadow cross your breath. Let no whisper find your ears. May the guardians of the four winds wrap your heart in silk." You feel a little shiver run up your spine, the good kind. And as you step out into the desert again, the stars above look less like cold, distant lights, and more like watching eyes. Familiar, knowing, maybe even a little proud. You're not just learning about rituals anymore. You're part of the memory of them. The cool night air wraps around you like a soft blanket as you leave the House of Life behind. Your feet crunch over scattered gravel, and cracked pottery shards as you approach a towering structure with an odd silhouette. No grand columns or sweeping archways here. Instead, you find yourself before a massive mud brick mound crowned with a tiny chapel. This is a mastaba, a kind of ancient Egyptian tomb. But tonight, you're about to dive into one of their most unsettling secrets. Inside, the walls are decorated with bright, colorful paintings depicting daily life, harvests, feasts, and scenes of servants attending their masters. But hidden among these cheerful images is a practice that's more than a little eerie. Human sacrifice, or at least the ritualized symbolic versions of it. You see, while ancient Egypt is famous for its respect for life and careful mummification, rituals, some tombs and temple reliefs suggest that, at least in the early dynastic periods, the sacrifice of servants or animals might have been a way to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. This wasn't just about death. It was about loyalty beyond the grave. Historians still argue whether these sacrifices were common or mostly symbolic. Some think the stories of servants being buried alive to accompany their master are exaggerated or misunderstood. After all, Egypt was famously pragmatic. But others point to early tomb excavations revealing tiny skeletons of animals or even humans beneath royal burial sites. You peer closer at a small, cracked jar painted with the figure of a jackal, the god Anubis's companion. The jar contained resin and traces of blood, possibly part of a purification rite or offering. But here's the quirky detail. Some scholars believe that in later periods, Egyptians replaced live sacrifice with substitute offerings. This might mean placing carved figures, inscribed bricks, or even symbolic objects to represent what was once a living being. It's like swapping a real chicken for a rubber ducky in a ritual. The spirit world was flexible, apparently. You spot a rough sketch on a stone tablet. A servant kneeling, eyes downcast, hands raised in a gesture of submission. Nearby, a seated nobleman looks on impassively. You imagine the servant's final thoughts: hope, fear, or maybe a strange kind of pride. After all, if death meant eternal service in the afterlife, maybe it was an honor. One fringe theory suggests that these ritual sacrifices were part of an older, now lost belief system that predated the familiar Egyptian religion. That the idea of willingly giving life to protect a king or noble was once sacred. But over time, the practice became taboo and was replaced by symbolic acts. As you wander deeper into the tomb, you find a hidden niche containing small figurines called shabtis. These were crafted to serve the dead in the afterlife, doing tasks like farming or cleaning on their behalf. It's like a supernatural to-do list. Imagine outsourcing chores beyond the grave. The contrast between these miniature servants and the possible human sacrifices is striking. One hand you have the grim possibility of real lives ended, and on the other, tiny magical stand-ins meant to make eternal life easier. You recall hearing about a tomb where hundreds of shabtis were found, each inscribed with spells telling them exactly what to do. The Egyptians really didn't want to lift a finger after death. Fair enough. Walking out of the tomb, you glance back at the walls. The faces painted there seem more alive now. Silent witnesses to rituals both solemn and disturbing. You can almost hear the echoes of voices long gone, whispering about loyalty, sacrifice, and the strange, thin line between life and death. The desert wind carries a faint scent of myrrh and something else, something metallic. You shiver, not from cold, but from the weight of the history you've just touched. You keep walking, wondering if these acts of... Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. In ancient Egypt, death was never simple. It was a complex web of beliefs, fears, and rituals that stretched beyond understanding. An endless dance with the unknown. And tonight, you've been invited to the dance. The desert night has deepened, stars wheeling overhead like silent sentinels. Your footsteps slow as you approach a narrow channel carved into the rock. A hidden path leading to a spot few outsiders ever see. You're standing at the edge of the Valley of the Kings, home to tombs not just of pharaohs, but of secrets, curses and rituals meant to guard against the living themselves. Tonight, you're diving into the realm of funerary curses. You've probably heard the cliché, curse of the pharaohs. But the truth behind these warnings is far stranger and more human than Hollywood's mummies come back to life plotlines. Inside the dark tomb, your torchlight flickers against painted walls depicting gods with animal heads and scenes of judgment. But tucked into the hieroglyphs are warnings, sometimes explicitly spelled out, that anyone who disturbs the tomb will face terrible consequences. These weren't just scare tactics for tourists. They were serious deterrents meant to protect the tomb's contents and honor the dead. One famous example is the curse found on the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, which warns that anyone who enters will be met with death or misfortune. You know the story. Several members of the team who opened his tomb died under mysterious circumstances, fueling legends that still persist today. But historians still argue whether these curses were widespread or limited to select tombs. Some scholars think curses were more about legal protection, a sort of spiritual no trespassing sign, while others argue they had a real psychological impact on tomb robbers. You brush dust from a carved stone tablet bearing a curse. He who disturbs the peace of this tomb shall have his days cut short and his heart filled with fear. Reading it aloud, you almost expect the air to chill. Here's a quirky twist. Some curse spells involved calling upon not just gods, but demons and wild animals, snakes, scorpions, even crocodiles, to protect the tomb. In a way, these curses were early security systems, combining divine wrath with natural hazards. Some archaeologists speculate that the Egyptian priests who inscribed these curses might have been a little superstitious themselves, adding extra layers of threat just in case. You examine a small statue of a guardian deity, its eyes painted fiercely, and wonder, did the ancient Egyptians really believe these curses would physically harm the living? Or was it more about respect and psychological warfare? A fringe theory even suggests some curses were later fabrications, added during periods when tomb robbing became rampant, to discourage looters through fear of supernatural punishment. Walking deeper, you pass a chamber with ancient graffiti, scribbled, notes left by tomb visitors centuries ago, sometimes challenging or mocking the curses. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, skepticism existed. You step outside, the cool breeze a relief after the tomb's suffocating air. The desert seems to hum softly with stories Stories of fear, reverence, and human attempts to control what's beyond life. You pause, feeling the weight of millennia pressing down. In Egypt, death was never just an end. It was a battleground, a negotiation, a place where magic and belief tangled in shadows. And as you walk away, you can't help but glance back. Because in the Valley of the Kings, the past isn't silent. It's watching. The chill of the night deepens as you trudge across the sandy dunes toward a cluster of ancient ruins. No grand pyramid here, just the remains of a small temple, barely holding its form against the years. But within these crumbling stones lies a ritual as perplexing as it is disturbing. The opening of the mouth ceremony. If you thought ancient Egyptian funerary practices were all about elaborate mummification and gold masks, think again. This was the grand finale, the mystical moment when the dead were literally brought back to life. Sort of. You step into the shadowed chamber where priests once gathered. They held tools, chisels, knives, and ceremonial wands, not to desecrate but to awaken the senses of the deceased. The ritual's goal was to restore the dead person's abilities, to speak, breathe, eat, see, because in ancient Egyptian belief, without these, your soul was trapped, silent and powerless. You watch in your mind's eye as a priest touches the lips of a statue or mummy with a special tool, whispering spells to open the mouth. The scene is eerie yet profound, a mix of theater and sacred magic. There's a mainstream historical fact here. The opening of the mouth ceremony was a crucial part of burial rites from the Old Kingdom onward, performed to ensure the deceased's spirit could interact with the living world. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some priests reportedly used actual animal parts during the ritual, like ox tongues or crocodile teeth. Not exactly your everyday dental appointment. Historians still argue whether these parts were symbolic props or thought to transfer animal strength and senses to the dead. Some think the ritual evolved from older shamanic practices. Others see it purely as symbolic. Imagine the ritual's sensory impact. The scent of incense, the soft chanting, the delicate touch of sacred tools on cold stone or wrappings. It's almost like a medical checkup for the afterlife. And yes, while it sounds like a ritual designed to reanimate zombies, it was more about empowering the spirit. The dead were expected to live on in a world layered atop this one, communicating with gods and family alike. You run your fingers over the carved walls, tracing images of the ceremony. Priests with elaborate headdresses perform the rites as the deceased lies still, awaiting rebirth. Some fringe theories suggest the opening of the mouth ceremony had hidden meanings, perhaps political, aimed at legitimizing royal power by linking rulers with divine life force. You step outside into the cool desert air, the stars casting long shadows. You feel a strange kinship with those ancient priests, performing rites that teeter between science, religion, and theater. You shuffle away, the echoes of whispered spells trailing behind you like a soft sigh. The desert wind hums softly, carrying faint scents of frankincense and dusty stone as you continue your nocturnal journey. You find yourself drawn toward a less visited part of the ancient city, an area dense with small shrines and altars cluttered with remnants of offerings. This is the domain of the silent worshippers, those everyday folks whose rituals were intimate, personal, and sometimes downright strange. You crouch beside a tiny altar piled with miniature clay vessels. Their surfaces are worn smooth, but traces of red and blue paint remain. You imagine the hands that once crafted them, perhaps a mother, a farmer, or a craftsman, each leaving a tiny piece of themselves behind. One mainstream historical fact is that Egyptians, even those far from the royal court, engaged in ritual acts to influence their daily lives, from fertility to protection from disease. But tonight, you'll encounter the quirky and the obscure. Rituals involving apotropaic magic meant to ward off evil. Some of these involved stuffing animal parts, like baboon jaws or crocodile claws, into doorways. The goal? To keep harmful spirits out. It's a bit like ancient Egyptian pest control, but for ghosts. You lean closer to a small figurine, crudely shaped, but painted with bright eyes. Scholars still argue whether such items were merely charms, or believed to house actual protective spirits. You sniff the air and catch a faint metallic tang, possibly from a now oxidized amulet buried in the sand nearby. Amulets were worn by nearly everyone, made from materials ranging from simple faience to precious gold. They were believed to hold real power, with each symbol carefully chosen for protection, health, or luck. Among these smaller-scale rituals, one stands out: the practice of dream incubation. Egyptians sometimes slept in temples dedicated to gods like Serapis or Imhotep, hoping to receive healing visions or divine advice. They believed dreams were windows into another realm, a kind of mystical inbox. Fringe researchers propose that this tradition influenced later sleep temples in ancient Greece, showing how ritual and belief migrate and morph across cultures. You find a broken pottery shard etched with the name of Bes, the dwarf god known for protecting households and women in childbirth. His image was deliberately strange: lion-like mane, protruding tongue, and a fierce, protective glare. Bes was a weird mascot, combining humor and horror, reminding everyone that even gods could be a bit goofy. You chuckle softly, imagining families gathering around a small statue of Bes, hoping his odd face would keep nightmares and evil spirits at bay. As you stand, the moon peeks from behind a cloud, casting silvery light on the scattered relics. You sense that these small, personal rituals, though less grand than those of kings and priests, were no less vital. They were the heartbeat of everyday faith, the quiet ways people wrestled with uncertainty. You take one last look at the altar, feeling the weight of countless whispered prayers, hopes, and fears. In the end, ancient Egyptian ritual was not just about death or the divine, but about living with mystery. And sometimes, just sometimes, a little bit of magic in the mundane. You shake the sand from your clothes and head toward the Nile's edge, where the rhythmic sound of water lapping against the bank offers a gentle contrast to the dry desert silence. Here, near the river's life-giving flow, another ancient Egyptian ritual unfolds. One that mixes mystery, devotion, and a dash of the bizarre. The Festival of the Dead, or the Feast of the Valley. You imagine the scene. Families and priests gathering as twilight deepens, carrying offerings of food, wine, and flowers to honor their ancestors. The air buzzes with the smell of burning incense, and the murmur of prayers meant to guide the spirits safely back to their resting places. 1. Solid historical fact. The Festival of the Valley was a major annual event, where Egyptians celebrated the connection between the living and the dead, often involving processions from the city to necropolises across the Nile. But here's where it gets quirky. Some reports suggest that during these festivities, people would hold mock funerals, or even temporarily adopt the identities of the deceased, wearing masks and costumes. It was a way to commune, embody, or even temporarily become their ancestors. Imagine Halloween meets ancient Egypt, but with far more solemnity and slightly fewer candy bars. Scholars still debate whether this role-playing was intended as a spiritual practice or a kind of communal therapy. Did participants believe they were truly channeling the dead? Or was it a socially sanctioned way to process grief? As you follow the imagined procession, you come across a small boat, called a bark, carved from wood and richly decorated. These boats were believed to ferry gods and spirits across the celestial waters. During the festival, actual boats were floated on the Nile, symbolically carrying the dead on their journey. One fringe theory argues that these rituals reflect early Egyptian ideas of reincarnation, or the cyclical nature of life and death. Concepts less obvious in the later, more rigid religious texts. You spot a handful of visitors offering bread and beer to the river, their voices soft with reverence. It's an intimate moment, a reminder that these rituals were about connection between worlds, generations, and people. Near the riverbank, you notice the figure of Osiris, god of the afterlife, often depicted wrapped like a mummy but standing, tall and alive. His myth, involving death and resurrection, was central to many of these ceremonies, offering hope of rebirth beyond the grave. You catch yourself humming a tune, an ancient chant perhaps lost to time but carried forward in spirit. This festival wasn't just a spectacle, it was a way to keep the past alive, to hold memory in the present, and to invite the future into the fold. As night deepens, you let the soft murmur of the Nile wash over you, imagining the flickering torchlight of ancient celebrations. And you realize that beneath the strange rituals and mysterious rites lies a simple truth: the desire to be remembered, loved, and never truly gone. You tread softly through the shifting sands as dawn begins to bleed into the sky, the desert horizon glowing faint pink and gold. Your journey through ancient Egypt's rituals has brought you close to the edge of human experience, to places both sacred and strange. But before the day fully awakens, you pause one last time to consider the rituals of transition, the mysterious rites marking the boundary between life and death, and the lingering questions that still haunt scholars today. In a humble shrine, nestled among the ruins, you find evidence of the opening of the mouth ceremony's final counterpart, the funerary banquet. Unlike the somber silence you might expect, this was a lively affair. Part feast, part sacred celebration. Loved ones gathered to share food and drink in honor of the departed, believing that these offerings nourished the soul on its journey. One well-known fact is that funerary banquets were common throughout ancient Egyptian history, often involving bread, beer, onions, and wine. Comfort food for the afterlife, if you will. But here's a quirky detail. Some texts mention special ghost cakes baked for the occasion, with shapes and ingredients meant to attract and appease specific spirits. It's almost like ancient Halloween treats, though decidedly less sugary. Historians still debate the exact symbolism and social function of these banquets. Were they primarily religious ceremonies, social gatherings, or a bit of both? Some suggest they reinforced family bonds, ensuring the dead remained part of the community. You notice inscriptions that mention the Ka and Ba, Egyptian, terms for aspects of the soul that needed sustenance and care after death. The idea that parts of your spirit might wander, get hungry, or need to be comforted is oddly relatable. Who hasn't felt a restless night or a nagging hunger for something unseen? A fringe theory proposes that these rituals reflect an ancient understanding of psychology, a way of externalizing grief and loss through ceremony. You lean against a crumbling wall, letting your thoughts drift. All these rituals, sacrifices, curses, ceremonies, are attempts to wrestle with the unknown, to assert control over fate, and to preserve identity beyond the ephemeral. The ancient Egyptians knew life was fragile and death was vast, but they didn't shy away from it. They danced, whispered, and prayed in its shadow, weaving a tapestry of belief that endures millennia later. As the first rays of sun touch your face, you feel the pulse of that distant world, its mysteries, still alive, echoing softly in the silence. You take a deep breath, feeling both humbled and strangely comforted. Because after all, these rituals weren't just about endings, they were about beginnings too, and now, as the new day begins, so does your own journey beyond this ancient story. Word count: 1088. Wind down now, as you settle into the quiet dark of your room. The stories you've heard tonight gently fold around you like a soft, familiar blanket. The desert winds slow, the ancient chants fade into the hush, and the weight of thousands of years rests lightly on your eyelids. Remember that the rituals you've traced weren't just strange customs or distant myths. They were human attempts to understand the deepest mysteries, to comfort the fear of the unknown, and to hold close the ones who passed beyond. Breathe in slowly, the cool night air carrying whispers of incense, myrrh, and the timeless Nile. Feel the slow turning of the cosmos, the dance of life and death, weaving through the ages, just as it does now, right here. You don't have to unravel every mystery or conquer every fear. Sometimes it's enough to simply listen, to feel, and to rest. So let your mind drift gently, carry